And it's because of what social media has done to universities and so many other institutions in the last 7 years or so that I hate social media. Now, in fact, I have come to believe that a free and open society cannot continue much longer if social media continues to damage 3 things that I really care about. And those are young people, universities, and liberal democracy. In my remaining time, I'm going to make the case that social media has caused devastation in these 3 areas since 2012. And then I'll say what I think government should and should not do. So I'll make 3 main points. The first is the fragilization of Gen Z. So in August 2017, Jean Twenge wrote an article in The Atlantic with the provocative title, "Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation?" And when I read it, I thought, wow, Jean is taking a risk here, because she showed these graphs with these hockey stick curves, but it was just 2 or 3 years of data. Because in 2017, all we had was data up throughout 2015. And so we had 2 or 3 years showing upturns in all these things. And I thought, well, if that turns down, she's going to look foolish. But it didn't turn down. It kept going up and up and up. Now, when that article came out, there were a lot of critics. A lot of people said, oh, she's exaggerating, she's cherry picking, oh, the trend isn't real. You know, Gen Z, they're just comfortable talking about it. That's why the numbers are going up a little, because it's a good thing. They're willing to admit that they're depressed. So there were a lot of skeptics right after the article came out, and Robbie in his chapter on this area quotes a number of those skeptics, but those are all from 2017, at least most of the citations were from 2017. That was a legitimate take in 2017, but in the years since then, the numbers have gone up so far that the Surgeon General recently issued an advisory on teen mental health because those numbers have gone up by 50 to 100% on many measures. In fact, if you're still skeptical that there's a real epidemic of mental illness, if you think it's just, changes in self-report on surveys, let's look at behavior. Jean and I have been collecting all the studies we can find from the US and the UK and Canada. And so here are the numbers for self-harm. And this is hospital admissions. This is not self-report. Hospital records for teenagers brought in because they harmed themselves, mostly cutting themselves. If you graph it out, the lines are pretty stable. They don't move around very much up until about 2009, 2010. And then suddenly, in the next 5 years, the numbers are up 62% for older teen girls. The rate of hospital admission per 100,000 in the population is up 62%. For girls aged 10 to 14, these are little girls. These are prepubescent or just entering puberty girls. The rate is up 189%. By 2015, nearly triples by 2015, and it's up more since then. Same thing in the UK, same thing in Canada, and similar story for suicide. There it's up for both boys and girls. And again, for the youngest kids, the 10 to 14s, the percentage increase is more than double. In a few years, the suicide rate has doubled, and then it stayed either level or increasing. Now, what caused it? That's the key thing. Now, Robbie and the other skeptics point to studies. There are a lot of studies out there, and many of them find no relationship between the amount of time young people spend on their devices and their rates of depression. Now, there's one particularly influential study by Andrew Shabilsky and Amy Orban, 2019. They reported an overall correlation of around 0.03 between time on devices and various measures of depression in 3 large data sets. And that study where they reported, oh, this is about as big as the correlation between mental illness and eating potatoes. That finding got a lot of press all over the world. And since then, a lot of experts say, oh, well, we looked at this and there's nothing there. But here's the problem with those studies. They lump all kids together, that is boys and girls. They lump all screen activities together, including watching Netflix, texting with your friends, FaceTime, browsing the web, and posting photos of yourself in a bikini for people to make comments about. You just lump them all together and you find a 0.03 correlation. But guess what? If you take the same data sets, and Jean Twenge and I did this, take the same data sets, use the same statistical techniques, but you zoom in on girls and social media, the correlation isn't 0.03, it's 0.2, which is a very large correlation in public health matters. The correlation between exposure to lead in childhood and adult IQ is 0.09. Public health is all about effects around 0.05 to 0.15, 0.2 at the most. This is as big as anything else we worry about. Now, of course, correlation is not causation, Robbie points out, but we found about 15 experiments, and the great majority of them also, using random assignment, find effects on mental health. You want more evidence? Ask the girls. That's what Facebook did in that study that was leaked last September. And what do the girls say? They say it loud and clear. It's social media, and especially Instagram. As one girl in the UK said, the reason why our generation is so messed up and has higher anxiety and depression than our parents is because we have to deal with social media. Everyone feels like they have to be perfect. Point number 2, from curiosity to fear in universities. So a crucial part of my story is that social media was not toxic in its original formulation. You put up links to your friends, your favorite bands. In 2004, 2005, it was not toxic. Everything changed beginning in 2009 when Facebook adds the like button and Twitter copies it. Twitter adds the retweet button, Facebook copies it, the share button, and then other platforms copy them. And now you have so much engagement data that you can use algorithms to feed stuff to people based on what will engage them, which means emotions, which means especially anger. So everything changes between 2009 and 2012. We get a much more, this is when Facebook perfects that business model based on advertising and gluing people to the screen by having viral emotional content. That's when everything changes, 2009 to 2012. One of the engineers at Twitter who worked on the retweet button was quoted a couple years ago as saying he regretted what he did because Twitter became a nastier place immediately. He said, when he watched those first Twitter mobs form, he said, we just gave a loaded gun to a 4-year-old. And that's where we are. That's why call-out culture and victimhood culture, but call-out culture in particular, emerges in the early 2010s. That's what Greg Lukianoff began to see on campus in 2014. When Gen Z arrives on campus around 2013, 2014, kids born 1996 or 7 or later, Greg begins to see this weird pattern, this vindictiveness, this fragility, this attack mode. It wasn't there in 2012, but by 2014, 2015, it was intense, and it was scary, and it changed our behavior. We've done a lot of research at Heterodox Academy on attitudes, and what we find is that students are afraid to speak on campus because they're afraid of, not their professors, other students. And professors feel they're walking on eggshells, not because of other professors, because of students. And it's not most students. Most students are lovely. They want to learn. They want to be challenged. But there are enough around that make it so that we all have to walk on eggshells. As Deb Mashik said, I'm sorry, is that 5 minutes left in my? Okay, okay. As Deb Mashik said, former executive director of Heterodox Academy, one of her students said, my motto is silence is safer. What a sad motto for a college student. The third point, very briefly, is the Achilles heel of democracy. Plato said that democracy is the second worst form of government because rule by the demos, the masses or the mob, inevitably decays into tyranny. So the founding fathers of this country gave us all kinds of mechanisms to slow down mob dynamics. Well, needless to say, it didn't work very well after 2009. So I'll skip ahead, and we can talk about this later. But basically, democracy has a known Achilles heel, a known spot, like on the Death Star, where if you hit that spot, it's going to blow apart. And it is the ease with which we are divided into factions that hate each other so much, we don't care what happens to the country. Social media, especially Twitter, but also Facebook and others, have really targeted that spot. Now, what can we do? The resolution here is not Congress shall regulate. I really enjoyed Robbie's book. I recommend it to you. He's such a clear writer. He goes through every possible issue that people talk about, and you find out there's a lot of misunderstanding of what's going on. He also points out just how terrible Congress is at regulating, and some of the ideas proposed, by Hawley and others, they're specifying, micro-specifying, and after 30 minutes they should be kicked off. I mean, these are just stupid, stupid bills. So if I was defending the motion, Congress shall regulate, I would just say, well, it's hopeless, and I'm going to go jump in a lake. But what we're talking about here is, do we have a national emergency? Do we have a gigantic problem facing our young people, our democracy, and our institutions? And if so, a lot of it is commons dilemmas, like prisoners' dilemmas, things that are hard to resolve if you're one person. For example, many of you are parents, many of you have kids. Raise your hand if you want your children to be on Instagram. Raise your hand if you think that's a good thing for them. Okay, raise your hand if your kids are on Instagram. Okay, not many parents here, maybe not among libertarians, but okay. Okay, I can't see with the lights in my eyes. Take it from me, all of us parents who let our kids on Instagram, it's only because they say, but everybody else is on it, I'll be excluded if I'm not on it. So we're caught in a trap, and we need central leadership to break it. In particular, what kids most need is delay entry. The COPPA bill that set the age of internet adulthood, it was originally going to be 16, was the original bill from Ed Markey. Lobbyists got it down to 13 back in 1996. At that age, you're like an adult. That was a terrible idea, and now we know. The age must be raised. I think it should be 16 or 18. These are minors, and we need to enforce it. There needs to be some kind of age verification. So there are a number of urgent things that have to be done. The UK is making some progress. Perhaps they'll take the lead here, but I think we need to do it in this country too. Protecting democracy is much harder, I grant, because the things the left wants to do and the things the right wants to do are often opposites. So perhaps we'll talk about specifics later, but I do think we need to look into ways to encourage the platforms to do identity verification, but especially, here's the main thing, changes to the architecture. I don't want a government agency either making decisions about what you can say, what you can't say. That would be a disaster. I have so many libertarian friends. I've been semi-brainwashed just by osmosis. I don't want the government making decisions about what people say. But there are changes to the architecture and the virality. That's where we can have big impacts that are content neutral, politically neutral, and language independent. They'd work all over the world. So in closing, Instagram and TikTok are raising our children. Our children are spending more time with them than they are talking to us, and those platforms channel the enormous force of peer pressure and peer norms onto them. Facebook and Twitter are running our public square, and they are curating what passes for deliberation in our deliberative democracy. How's that going? Well, now, in 2011, we had the height of techno-democratic optimism. We thought these things would be a boon to democracy. But now we know they were Pandora's box, and we unwittingly unleashed demons. We can and we must find ways to tame them. Thank you.